Welcome, viewers. This is A Vision Media Broadcast. Once again, we back with another special show right now, and we have a legend here. This brother is Speech, two-time Grammy Award-winning founder and lead singer of the four-time platinum hip-hop collective Arrested Development, known for consistently pushing the artistic and social envelope. Brother Speech, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good, my brother. How are you?
I'm good, man. It's a pleasure. Once again, I've been trying to reach out to you. You here now on the show, and I'm happy. We're gonna have a good time, you know.
Word up.
So we're gonna walk down memory lane, bring it up in the middle, and take it home from there.
Okay.
What I find, first of all, I would like to talk about the hit songs. People Every Day, Tennessee, which is my favorite, Mr. Window, which is my favorite, Natural, Revolution, Mama always on stage, Mama's always on stage, and Ease My Mind, right?
Word up. Okay.
Now, I would like to know this. Can we go back to something that I think is very interesting? You was born in the same year that Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
1968.
1960, man. Can you take me to the years of you growing up around that time? How was it?
I grew up in an all-white neighborhood in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Milwaukee's known as one of the hardest places to grow up as a black person. I was the only black. We were the only black family in this neighborhood. It's a middle-class neighborhood, not very rich, but Milwaukee has a lot of segregation, and most of the black neighborhoods are poorer, and generally speaking, there's no rich black neighborhoods. And so my mother and father grew up in the black neighborhoods of Milwaukee, and a Jewish family, they wanted to move to the suburbs, and a Jewish family lived in this particular house, and they were getting persecuted and by the white families that surrounded them. And so the Jewish family was deciding to leave. And my mother was looking at the house, and the Jewish family said, yo, I'd be willing to sell you this house for very cheap just to get these people back for what they've done to me and my family. And my mom took the house and bought it from this Jewish family. They gave it to my mom and dad for dirt cheap.
Yeah.
And then I was born in that environment. So my experiences as the only black kid was very tough, because back in my youth, there was these gangs called the Greasers. And I don't know how old you are, but there was, back in those days,
47.
the days were like,
Yeah.
okay, so you might know about these things, but back in these days, there was, the movie called Grease.
Grease.
It's sort of like Fonzie and with Happy Days, he's part of the Greasers movement. And it's basically a movement of whites at the time that was, it was against black people, it was against Jewish people, it was against, people of different backgrounds. And the Greasers back then would pick on my brother and I, my adopted sister, and even beat us up and stuff, like get into real bloody fights in that neighborhood. I never forget growing up, I was coming home from school one day, and my house was at the bottom of a hill. So I would walk down this hill going towards my house, and I noticed that the picture window in front of our house was broken. So I'm walking home from school by myself because my mother and father worked. And I get closer and closer, and I realize that the front window's been broken up, and all of our living room furniture was on top of our roof.
Wow.
And there was swastikas painted on our door. I went back to the backyard of my house, and the swing sets had been demolished by a sledgehammer.
Wow.
And this is as a young kid. I was in grade school. And the greasers had done that. Greasers had, really put terror into, our family's existence, just like they did to the Jewish family that was there before us. And my father came home. Of course, I called my mom and dad. My father came home, got a 45, and went to this one greaser's house and put it up to his head.
Wow.
Told him if he ever came around our house one more time, it'd be the last time he ever does anything on this planet. And the parents got involved, police got involved. Long story short, after that day, no one else did those kind of things to us.
That's right.
Other types of racism was still happening, But yeah, that's how I grew up. 1968 was the year Martin Luther King was murdered.
Yeah.
My mother, a lot of black, after he was murdered, there was riots. And my mother was a school teacher at the time. A lot of the black businesses respected my mom and dad, and they needed to tell the black community that they were back open again after the riots had sort of looted their stores and stuff. So they needed to get the word out, and there was no black newspapers in the city. So they asked my mother if she would be willing to create a pamphlet that would let the community know that they're open for business and, they're trying to keep their business alive. So my mother started a pamphlet called the Soul City Shopper. And that would ultimately turn into a newspaper called the Milwaukee Community Journal, which my mother owns that newspaper to this day. It's the largest black newspaper in Wisconsin. It has been for the last 40 years. So yeah, it was tough growing up in those times. It's very interesting. I'm in a white reality. I'm in a very black reality. I'm facing blackness, but inside a very white world, So it was very interesting times. Very, just two worlds, the tale of two worlds. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like you grew up and experienced a lot of things, coming up with racism. And with your family, and you're trying to be strong through all of that as a child, and you had to be.
Yeah.
And that's where my next question comes in. That when I asked, I wanted to know, how do your personal experiences shape the themes and stories in your songs? Because of all the things you went through, how does that happen?
It shapes it in every way. Living in Milwaukee, the realities of racism are very in your face. You see the juxtaposition between the black neighborhoods, the white neighborhoods, the black poverty, the white riches, the sort of the hardships that blacks are facing, and the seemingly utopian reality that white people face. It's like it's like black and white there. So you see the juxtaposition very simply. Like, I live in Atlanta now. And Atlanta is not always as easy to see because there's a lot of wealthy black neighborhoods in Atlanta, a ton of them, more than I can count.
Yeah.
There's whole areas of town where it's only blacks, and all of them are in $1 million homes. And, there's a lot of black success in Atlanta. And so it's a different energy than where I grew up at. But where I get my inspirations to write, generally speaking, is from my experiences in Milwaukee, which I had for the first 18 years of my life.
Right.
And I still go home to Milwaukee probably once a year, so it's still very much a part of how I think, the world that I see.
Right.
I didn't grow up in New York, where there's people from all walks of life and backgrounds. Things were very black and white for me, growing up.
Wow. And I find that very, very interesting, because where I used to live, it was, white and blacks, but it was separated. It was whites here and we down this way. So I can understand, things that was going on, but I know it's worse in certain parts in the South, or Tennessee, something like that. But when it comes to the early 90s, when the glorification of races and oppressive stereotypes defined the genre, right? What is it that was it that moment when the group proved that speaking from a place of love and honesty can help you rise to the top of your industry?
You know, the 90s was an impressive time. You know, the late 80s is when Public Enemy came out, De La Soul, Tribe Called Quest,
Last year,
um, you know, KRS One, Jungle Brothers.
right?
Um, you know, there was this rise of conscious lyrics, you know, conscious and intentional lyrics from Black people. You know, at the same time, NWA, Ice-T, Cube, all of that was happening as well. But there was this diverse messaging and output coming from Black people. And the early 90s, same difference, even more so. So when we started, which was late 80s, we weren't out yet, but we had started in 87.
87.
I knew because of those other, you know, pioneers that I just mentioned, that more was possible. I knew that you didn't have to be gangster, you didn't have to be one dimensional, that you could be numerous things and still be Black, still be an entertainer in hip hop, so on and so forth. So I wanted to do a lot of soul searching to find out who I really am, what I really want to be, and what do I want to talk about. And when I started finding more of those roots and those truths of who I am, it's when Arrested Development was born. It was like, it felt the most honest and the most sincere.
Mm-hmm.
And we started to gain some traction in Atlanta, which to me was like virgin territory. In Atlanta, there was hip hop, but it was very much stuck on the Miami bass scene,
Okay.
like Luke Skywalker and that kind of music, you know, 125 and up beats per minute,
Yeah.
low 808.
Right.
But it wasn't too much more than that. It didn't have a lot of width at the time. And therefore, I felt like coming from Milwaukee, there was a lot of opportunity in Atlanta because in Milwaukee, we were used to loving all kinds of hip hop. We were, and just not even hip hop, all kinds of music. So I was a DJ in Milwaukee. So in Milwaukee, I was exposed to house music, which was in Chicago, techno music, which was in Detroit with Juan Atkins, and hip hop, which was in New York and LA.
Yeah.
Go-go, which was in DC.
DC, that's right.
All of that was fair game to us in Milwaukee. Like we liked all of it. And of course we liked R&B as well, and even some rock music, to be honest. So I came to Atlanta with a very open mind and very feeling like Atlanta hasn't reached its full potential musically yet,
right.
and especially in hip hop, and particularly in hip hop.
Yeah.
So
at that time, right?
I felt like at that time, yeah, and I felt like there was a lot to be done, and it was, you know, and I knew the movers and shakers that was doing things. Dallas Austin was young, just like I was, same age, and he was doing his thing with a woman named Joyce Irby, and then Jermaine Dupri, who was younger than I was, and he was doing his thing. He was the first one of us to get signed to a label with one of his groups, and it was a group called Silk Times Leather, and he was dope. But it was, like I said, just very untapped territory. So I remember hanging out with Jermaine, doing stuff at his house, production and stuff, hanging out with Dallas. But I was on some different stuff, and they knew that, and I knew what they were on. And so, yeah, so it was just a very interesting time in the early days to where I felt like it gave us a chance as a group to stretch our wings and open our wings and really do something dope for the culture.
Wow. And what you all did was definitely history in the making, because the 90s, 80s and the 90s, I call it the golden era, the golden years.
Me too.
And
Me too.
with those artists like yourself, Big Daddy Kane, Mobb Deep, put out back then, today's era cannot touch what's going on, what happened back then. You know what I mean?
Not at all. Not at all.
I know we got to kind of speed up. I just need to really know about this, and I wanted to call you first or talk to you before I ask this. It's pertaining to your brother, if possible. Terry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it possible if I can speak on that?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely.
What I wanted to say, your older brother Terry passed away from a tragic death, and from that you started Dr. Terrence N. Thomas Scholarship, lifting up the young, gifted, and Black, established in 1992. Yeah.
Yes.
Can we talk?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Definitely. So Arrested Development got a single deal. The single was going to be Mr. Wendell back with Natural on the B-side. And my grandmother passed away, who I had spent all my summers with. She was by far the most important grandmother that I had, and just a very important person in my life, very fundamental to my beliefs, my thinking. And Tennessee was very fundamental to my beliefs and thinking, just spending all those summers with her. Very rural lifestyle, self-determination lifestyle, a lot of growing of crops and killing our own food, and getting water from the well, sharing vegetables with other family groups and in the community, fighting racism together, unifying together. I mean, these were things that I learned being around my grandmother. And so when she passed away, I went to Tennessee for her funeral. My older brother, Terry, went to the funeral, and I showed him Arrested Development single, which was Mr. Wendell and Natural. He loved it. And I didn't know that same week, after leaving that funeral, Terry went back to where he was living at the time, which was in Pittsburgh. He died of an asthma attack, unexpected. He was 29 years old. And
sorry to hear that.
The last place I saw him, thank you. Last place I saw him was in Tennessee. And of course, the last place I saw my grandmother was in Tennessee. So, for her funeral. Yeah. So I wrote the song Tennessee, and I explained it in the lyrics. I say, my grandma passed, my brother's gone. I never at once felt so alone. Talking to God, I know you're supposed to be my steering wheel, not just my spare tire. And that song ended up being our first single, because even though we had signed for Mr. Wendell to become the first single, I felt like, I told the label, I really felt like I needed to express this song first. And we were a new group. We had never had any hits. We had no track record. At this time, no one from the South was really huge. Ghetto Boys did their thing. That was about it. Unless I include Miami, of course, Luke Skywalker and their whole thing. Mm-hmm. So they loved the song. They felt like it could be a great single. So we changed our whole thing, and they gave us an album deal. We released Tennessee as the first single. And anyway, my mom and I started this this scholarship fund. We
right afterwards, right?
I put in 20. Yeah, right after my brother died. This is once AD put out Tennessee. I made some money for the first time in my life, and I put in $20,000. My mother put in $20,000. We had $40,000, and we ended up raising over the years over $1 million to fund young Black kids to get through college. from Milwaukee. As I already told you, the opportunities are and were very tough. And so a
Yeah.
lot of people needed just some help to get enough money to go through college. And
Yeah.
my brother's death was the catalyst for that scholarship. It still exists today. People can donate anytime, even if it's $5, $20. All of it goes to helping these kids go through universities. We don't have any staff that is paid from this foundation and this scholarship. So, yeah.
Wow, I think that is wonderful, man. I really do, and I'm sorry I had to come after what happened, but it made everything a little better and easier because you did something positive, and you was already doing things positive. But after that, now you reaching for the kids. Now you're helping them go to
Yeah, yeah,
school.
yeah,
Mothers don't have
yeah.
any money to send their kids to college. You know,
Facts.
that's a wonderful thing, man. You know that happened.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I definitely am grateful. It was my mother's idea,
Yeah,
and her and I, you know, made it happen from those initial stages. And then since then, I mean, I lift up so many elders. You know, one of the women who was an entrepreneur in the Black community in Milwaukee, when she died, she left her whole will to the Terrence Thomas Scholarship Fund as well. So, I mean, you know, just people really having a conscious mindset
yeah.
right in the heart of the community saying, yo, we're going to help out these things that are going to help our people to move forward. Like, these are stories that I have in my mind and in my heart, you know? Yeah.
That's great, man. That's great. And there's another great thing that's going on with you also. Your father, Robert Thomas, was born in a poor farming community in Tennessee, who started in the business of Robbie's roasted corn. Can we talk about Robbie's roasted corn?
Yeah. So my father was a serial entrepreneur. He passed away in April of last year, but my father believed in Black empowerment through business. And he grew up in an extremely poor community called Glip, Tennessee, which is the area of Tennessee that I would visit every summer with his mother, my grandmother.
Wow.
And my grandmother, his mom, sent him to Milwaukee at age 5 because Jim Crow was still running things in the South.
Prologue.
There was a high probability that he wouldn't make it staying in the South. And many Black families were doing the same thing as my grandmother at that time. There's what's called the Great Migration, which was the biggest migration in the history of the United States of any color, any race, where out of the 13 million or so Black people that were living in the United States at the time, about 9 million of them left from the South at the same time period that my father left, was sent away from his mother to Milwaukee. About 9 million Black people were sent from the southern cities that they lived in by their elders to go to certain cities, either in the Midwest, the North, New York, the West, California, and even the other parts of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you get, you know, a lot of the Blacks that are presently in New York, those families that were raised in New York for a few generations, and those in the Midwest, Chicago, Detroit. That's where you get those Black families from. It's from that Great Migration, where a lot of the Midwest had factory jobs. And so there was more opportunity for Blacks to survive. And Jim Crow was putting a chokehold on Blacks in the South.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
so my father was one of those people. Long story short, he got to Milwaukee, he grew up in Milwaukee, and decided to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
One of the businesses he started was Robbie's Roasted Corn. The reason he started that was, as usual with Black entrepreneurs, he was trying to figure out a way to cut through all the racism and the hardships that racism caused. And he realized that, okay, there's this festival in Milwaukee called the Summerfest. It's the largest music festival in the world, believe it or not. And about 1 million people visit every year.
Wow.
And it's been going on for over 50 odd years. And so my father got in to Summerfest, and the hustle that he felt was the most that had the most potential and opportunities to work was selling corn. There was nobody doing it. And he came from the South, as you know.
Yeah.
My grandmother, his mother was a farm, she had her own field. And as I was telling you earlier, used to grow crops and things of this nature. So he felt like growing roasted corn and selling that, roasting it on the cob, selling that to the mainly all white customers was going to be a great opportunity. And he was 100% right.
Wow.
It blew up. It started doing extremely well. And that business has been going on for 45 years.
Wow.
My wife and I run it now, and
is it still, I'm sorry, is it still big like it was back then?
It is. In fact, it's bigger now than it was back then. So since we've taken it over, it's done even better. So yeah, but it's all because of my father. I mean,
yeah.
Just his insight and his vision to try things that weren't the norm,
Wow.
He and of course a lot of that's reflects in what I do musically with Arrested Development. It's trying things that aren't the norm. I think that's sort of the theme that I grabbed from one of the themes from many that I grabbed from my father. Yeah.
Like think outside the box. Think outside.
Exactly.
You know what?
Think outside of the box.
That's right. And back then when he was roasting corn, was it to the point where, and I'm gonna say it, how the white folks didn't like for blacks to have their own business? Did they bother him or try to harass him to stop roasting the corn or making money from it?
Ironically, no, not that endeavor. So it's a complex truth, but they actually liked the fact, because my father was really smart with this. So what he did is he opened up this corn roasting business, and he would wear a cowboy hat, Lee jeans. If you know what Lee jeans, I don't think those are popular anymore, but Lee jeans.
No, that's old school. But
old school.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, Lee's.
Exactly. The cowboy tassel shirts, the button up little shirts, plaid shirts. He did the whole thing. And I think they felt like he was not one of them, obviously, because he's a tall, dark-skinned black man, 6'4". But I think they felt like he related to whatever they was on, mentally.
Okay.
And he wasn't. He was actually very much an activist, but he also realized that they had money to spend and they had a product. He had a product that they would love.
That's right.
And he worked it. Now, from doing that, my father in 1988, I believe it was, became he won an award for top black businessman in Wisconsin. Okay. And at that point, he was extremely popular in Milwaukee as a businessman, and he got targeted by the government in Milwaukee, by the governor and the mayor, and he got targeted for tax evasion and things that they tend to do to a lot of our leaders, like Marcus Garvey in the past. They find things that they could throw at you to basically squash you. They did indeed squash my father's momentum. Thank God my mother was doing her newspaper thing, and that's what was able to sustain us as a family. But they literally crushed a lot of his momentum. Thank God also he was able to keep the corn roast. He passed it down to his children, and we were able to keep it going. But yeah, he had to declare bankruptcy and all of that type of stuff. So they really pounded on him. You know what I'm saying? So so it was a mixture of a lot of support from the people that love corn, you know what I mean? But a lot of persecution from the leadership of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so interesting dynamics.
I knew they was coming for him. They don't let you get but so big back in those times.
Facts.
And, I have to get this out also. Now when you listen to music, there's really nothing, no substance. There's nothing to it today. Everything is just sexual. I'm going to kill you. All this nonsense, And since 1991, Arrested Development has been cultural champions of consciousness and empowerment across the planet. What happened? Why is consciousness and empowerment pushed away from the music industry?
Very intentionally. Um, Two things happened. One is they there was a law passed in '96 called the Telecommunications Act.
Heard of that?
The Telecommunications Act allowed for huge corporate entities to buy up all the small entities in any industry. How it reflected in the music industry is, instead of every city and region having their own sort of radio stations that can break music in their own way, and songs can blow up starting from a city, then the state, then the region, and then nationwide. Instead of that happening, all these independent places happening, they bought up all these independent stations, and it became huge conglomerates that was running the music industry. And people that know the music industry and study this stuff would know that there used to be hundreds of record labels. It turned into three.
Yeah.
Nowadays, even just two major labels. So that's what the Telecommunications Act was enabling these corporations to do.
Mm-hmm.
It was signed in by Bill Clinton, and that really changed the game, because now there's less decision makers deciding what music is dope, what music deserves to be out there. And I don't know if you travel a lot, but if you travel to states nowadays, everything has become monolithic, where basically you can go to New York or you can go to LA, you can go to down south, and it's the same songs playing everywhere you go. It's very rare that you're going to hear a lot of diversity in the music. And that's because only two companies run basically all the music going on. So that really crushed the conscious output. It didn't change how many artists were trying to do and doing conscious music, but it did change how popular they were going to be. Because if you're not on these radio stations, or if you're not pushed and promoted on these particular magazines, which are also owned by the same people that own the radio stations, the same people that own the video channels, the same people that own the magazines and the venues. So like Clear Channel, for instance, owns venues, they own radio stations, TV stations, they own numerous media outlets. So if you're not part of their agenda, then you're just simply not going to be heard by most of the people in the United States. Of course, most music listeners don't even know none of this stuff. They could care less.
Yeah.
But of course, people in the industry that are speaking about these things know about it. And it affects not only what people hear and enjoy, but the mindset thereof. Because if you're not listening to different diverse thoughts and opinions and views, then your views yourself become very slim and narrow,
Wow. How do you feel? Like, do you listen to any of the new music today? Anything out here? Do you like or have a top 5 out here right now?
I do. I try to listen to a lot of it just to stay up on what's happening.
Yeah.
And obviously, there's definitely talented artists out there, doing their thing. But I would still say that it's a far cry from the diversity of thought, opinion, than it used to be in the late 80s, early 90s. A far cry. It's two different worlds.
Yeah.
So, back in the day, you could have a song out by Public Enemy called Night of the Living Bassheads, right? And it's talking about, don't sell crack in your own community. Go outside of your community if you're going to sell crack, right? That was one of the major sort of messages of that song.
Yeah.
At that same year, though, you had KRS-One talking about the drug world, and it's like he had a song, "Cocaine Business Controls America,"
illegal business,
and illegal business controls America. So, in his song, he's talking about the corporate in the government side of things,
right,
running the cocaine game, and how the government helps to bring in this coke in LA and other places and fills our neighborhoods with it. But then you got NWA, and they got songs like Dope Man, and they're talking about the dope man, and how he's the biggest dude in the black community, and he's exploiting the women in the neighborhood, and he's sort of the man that everybody looks up to, and so on and so forth. All of these records were talking about the same issue, but from totally different perspectives, which is
Yeah.
dope to me because it's almost like the news in a sense, how the news should be. It's giving people as listeners an opportunity to think about it in whatever way they choose, but they have numerous ways to view it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Whereas nowadays, it's not a lot of ways to view anything.
Right.
Nowadays, musically, you basically view things one way. It's like, okay, well, you definitely got to get your designer sugar game on. You got to get your designer bag and car game on. You got to get your, your money game, get your bag or what have you. Then you got to get, your girl, and you got to get, you got to be tough, and you got to, it's the same messages,
That's right.
basically.
Yeah.
And there's no diversity of thought, even though there's many issues that are going on today. I mean, obviously there's huge things going on in the Congo. There's huge things going on in Sudan. There's things going on in Palestine and Israel. There's things going on in America, of course. But none of that stuff is talked about in the music. You know what I'm saying? Like nobody's even addressing it. But it's huge. It's stuff that's going to definitely affect all of our lives right now and in the near future. But none of it's being addressed in the music.
Wow. What have you lost on the way to achieving what you have today?
What have I lost? I mean, I think I've lost some innocence. I talk about a song called, we have a new song out called Arrogance. And we have a new album out.
Yeah.
Arrogance, featuring Ohene Savant, Ishi from the original crew of Arrested Development. And it's talking about the arrogance of the industry today, how arrogant it is to be living off the shoulders of people that came before you in this industry, and yet you live off of our shoulders without question. You know what I'm saying? Like any new artists do. We paved the way for them to even have an audience to enjoy their music, and yet they're arrogant enough to sort of ignore what we've contributed and to ignore the wisdom that we can give them. As Daddy Kane says, there's a lot of game that we can pass on to them, but they ignore it, basically. The arrogance of the industry to think that they could just take an entire genre of music that was created to give the oppressed hope and to give us an outlet to express ourselves, to thrive, and to take that entire genre and turn it into what I would consider sort of prostitution, basically people just doing things only for the money and nothing else. It doesn't matter what they say, what they believe, it's just money. If it makes money, then it's warranted. You know what I mean? That's how the philosophy has become in mainstream hip hop. And so let's talk about arrogance. And that's how I feel. I think it's taken a lot of my innocence